There is a specific moment, quiet, almost unremarkable, when everything shifts. Not a grand confrontation, not a tearful phone call that lasts until midnight. Just a single sentence, delivered with absolute calm, that makes your adult child stop mid-sentence and actually look at you. Really look at you. For the first time in years. My name is Celestine. I am 79 years old, and 14 months ago, I was invisible inside my own family. Not invisible the way strangers ignore you on the street. Invisible the way furniture is invisible. Present, acknowledged in the vaguest sense, occasionally useful, but never truly seen. My son Raphael would call on Sunday afternoons with the predictability of a utility bill. The calls lasted between 6 and 11 minutes. I counted once, out of morbid curiosity. He would tell me about his week, his projects, his wife's sister's drama, his gym routine. Then he would ask if I was eating well, as though I were a houseplant requiring occasional watering, and then he would say he had to run. When I tried to speak, when I mentioned something I had read, or a memory that had surfaced, or a worry that had kept me up past 2 a.m, there was this sound he made. Not quite a sigh, something between a sigh and a silence. A practiced, gentle sound that meant, "We are not doing this right now." I absorbed it every time, swallowed it like a pill without water. The breaking point, when it arrived, did not look the way I expected. It was an ordinary Wednesday. I had spent the morning going through a box of old photographs I found under the guest bed. Photographs from when Raphael was 7, 8, 9 years old. There was one in particular that stopped me entirely. He was standing at the edge of the ocean with his arms stretched wide, eyes closed, face tilted toward the sun. He looked like he was trying to hold the whole horizon. I remembered taking that photograph. I remembered exactly what he had said afterward. "Mom, I touched the edge of the world." I called him because I needed to tell him about that photograph. Because sometimes a memory becomes so vivid, it requires a witness. He answered on the third ring. "Hey, Mom, kind of in the middle of something." I told him I had found the photograph. I described it. "That's sweet," he said, and then, "Can I call you back later?" He did not call back. I sat with the photograph in my lap until the light in the room changed from afternoon gold to the flat gray of early evening. And I thought, I am grieving a person who is still alive. I am mourning a relationship that technically exists, that shows up in my contacts list, that sends birthday messages through an app. But the real thing, the weight and warmth of genuine connection, had slipped away so gradually I had not noticed its going until I was already alone inside the absence. My first instinct was to write him a letter. Long, detailed, honest. The kind of letter I had written to my own mother once, decades ago, when I felt she did not truly see me. I wanted Raphael to understand the accumulation of small dismissals, how they had stacked up over years into something that now pressed against my chest. I drafted the letter 3 times. Each draft was more vulnerable than the last. By the third version, I was writing things I had never said aloud to anyone. I never sent it. Because I remembered what had happened in my marriage years before Raphael's father passed away. When I had written Aldous a letter very similar in texture and intent, he had read it, looked up at me with genuine distress in his face, apologized with complete sincerity, and then, within 6 weeks, returned entirely to his original behavior. The letter had moved him without changing him. Emotion without architecture crumbles. I destroyed all 3 drafts. My second strategy was what I privately called the graceful recession. I would simply become less available, stop initiating, let the silence do the work I was too tired to do with words. I had heard women my age recommend this approach with a kind of weary authority, as though scarcity might manufacture value where presence had not. I tried it for 2 months. In those 2 months, Raphael called 4 times. Twice to ask if I still had his grandmother's silver serving set, which he wanted for a dinner party. Once to tell me his company had been acquired, and he was, by his own assessment, a little rich. Once on my birthday, for 9 minutes. When the 2 months ended, and I finally called him, his voice carried the uncomplicated warmth of someone who had not noticed anything unusual about the preceding 8 weeks. There was no anxiety in his tone, no awareness of a gap. Recession, I concluded, only works when the other person is paying close enough attention to notice the withdrawal. If they are not watching, you simply vanish. I called my oldest friend, a woman named Ottoline, who has known me since we were 23 and shares with me the particular bond of having survived several decades of life's less romantic chapters. I told her everything: the photograph, the letter, the 2 months of deliberate silence. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the great gifts of a long friendship. Then she said, "You are trying to make him feel your absence, but what you actually need is to make him feel your presence." I did not fully understand what she meant. There is a difference, she continued, between a mother who disappears, hoping to be missed, and a mother who stands completely still and refuses to be walked through. One is a performance of pain. The other is a declaration of substance. She told me about a woman named Imara, a friend of her daughter's, a family therapist who had written about this precise dynamic. Adult children and aging parents, the quiet erosion of relational equity, the patterns that calcify without anyone intending them to. Ottoline had attended a small workshop Imara ran the previous autumn. She said Imara had a framework for this, a specific, counterintuitive approach she called the stillness principle. "It is not about what you demand," Ottoline said. "It is not even really about what you say. It is about where you stand when you say it." She gave me Imara's contact information. I emailed Imara that evening, feeling faintly absurd. A 79-year-old woman seeking advice on how to speak to her own child. Imara responded within 2 days and offered me a 40-minute phone conversation, no charge, because, she said, this question mattered to her. She was direct in a way that bypassed all the usual social softening. "Tell me," she said, "when Raphael dismisses you, what do you typically do in the 30 seconds that follow?" I described my usual response. The small surrender, the pivot away from my own hurt, the accommodation. "You are teaching him," she said, "not intentionally, but you are teaching him that the cost of dismissing you is zero, that your discomfort is something you will manage privately and never present to him as information he needs to act on." I asked her what the alternative was. "The alternative is not drama," she said immediately, as though she had anticipated my fear. "Not confrontation, not the kind of boundary setting that reads as aggression and makes adult children feel attacked and therefore defensive. What works, what actually works, neurologically, relationally, is something much quieter and much harder." She called it the stillness principle because the central move is not forward, it is not backward. It is an absolute refusal to keep moving in the direction you have always moved when uncomfortable. "When Raphael dismisses you," she said, "instead of absorbing it and continuing, you stop. You name what just happened, plainly, without heat. And then you make a specific, calm request. Those three things in that order: stop, name, request." She gave me the core phrase. She told me to write it down. I did. She said, "The reason most parents fail at this is they skip the stopping. They go straight to naming, and the naming comes out tangled with emotion because they have been sitting inside the emotion for the 30 seconds they spent absorbing the dismissal. The stop is not silence for dramatic effect. The stop is you resetting, breathing, arriving at neutral. Only then do you speak." She warned me about defensiveness, told me it was not a sign that the approach was failing. It was a sign that the old pattern was being interrupted, which would feel threatening before it felt clarifying. "Stay warm," she said. "This is not a war. You are not punishing him. You are simply refusing to ratify the way he has learned to treat you." We spoke for 55 minutes. When I hung up, I had 3 pages of notes and the core phrase underlined twice. I practiced it. Alone, in my kitchen, standing at the counter with a cup of tea cooling beside me, I said it aloud to nobody. It felt strange in my mouth, clinical, not like something Celestine would say. But I kept saying it because I had spent decades saying things that felt natural and produced nothing. And perhaps naturalness was the wrong criterion. The first real opportunity arrived 12 days later. Raphael called on a Tuesday, not his usual Sunday, which briefly raised my hope that something had shifted in him on its own. He needed to ask about the logistics of Christmas, whether I was planning to fly to him or whether he should plan to come to me. He preferred I fly to him, he mentioned, because the kids were in a school performance that week and it would be hard to leave the city. I said I would think about the flights. "Mom," he said, with that particular gentleness that contains within it a total absence of negotiation. "It's really not a big deal. Just check the airline app. It takes 2 minutes." There it was. My time, my deliberation, reduced to a 2-minute errand I was being slow to complete. I stopped, counted 3 slow breaths. Then I said, "Raphael, when you speak to me that way, as though my hesitation is laziness rather than a decision I'm working through, it doesn't feel respectful. I'd like you to try asking me again." The silence that followed was enormous. I had never heard Raphael produce that particular quality of silence. It was not the silence of irritation or withdrawal. It was the silence of someone who has stepped onto a floor they expected to be solid and found it unexpectedly has texture. "What?" he finally said, not aggressively, genuinely. I repeated the second half, calmly, almost gently. "I'd like you to try asking me again." Another pause, shorter this time. Then, "Are you able to look at flights sometime this week? Whenever works for you." My hand was pressed flat against the countertop, and I could feel the cool of the stone against my palm. "Yes," I said. "I'll look tomorrow morning." "Okay. Thanks, Mom." We hung up. I stood in the kitchen for a long time without moving. It had worked. Not explosively, not with the drama of transformation, but it had worked the way a compass works, quietly, reliably, pointing in the right direction. The next 3 months were not a smooth upward arc. Patterns that have been rehearsed for 15 years do not dissolve in a season. Raphael slipped back repeatedly. The tone that suggested my thoughts were charming but weightless. The half-attention during calls, his focus clearly bifurcated. The reflexive shortening of our conversations the moment I moved toward anything emotionally real. Each time, I stopped, named, requested. Not every instance went smoothly. There was a call in October when Raphael got genuinely frustrated. "Mom, I don't know why everything has become such a production lately." His voice had an edge I had not heard directed at me in years. I said, "I understand this feels different from how we've usually spoken. That's because it is different. I'm asking you to talk to me the way you'd talk to someone whose time and perspective you value. That's all." Silence again. Then, quietly, "I do value your perspective." "I know you do," I said. "I'd just like to hear it a bit more in how you speak to me." He called again 4 days later, not for a logistics question. He called to tell me about something that had happened at work that had unsettled him, something that had made him question a decision he had been proud of for years. He wanted, he said, my opinion. That was the first time in many years he had used that phrase. My opinion. I gave it to him carefully, honestly. He listened. He asked a follow-up question. We spoke for 40 minutes. The photograph, the one of 7-year-old Raphael with his arms flung wide at the ocean's edge. I had framed it by then and put it on my desk. Sometimes I look at it when I am on the phone with him now, as a kind of private reminder of who he has always been underneath the accumulated busyness of adult life. The core phrase, the one Imara gave me, is this: "When you speak to me that way, it doesn't feel respectful. I'd like you to try that again." Simple, specific, without accusation. It addresses behavior rather than character. It gives direction rather than delivering verdict. When he interrupts, "I wasn't finished. I'd like to complete my thought." When the tone carries that particular dismissive lightness, "The way you said that didn't land well. Can you try it differently?" When he moves to end a conversation before it has actually gone anywhere. "I feel like we haven't really talked yet. Can you give me 5 more minutes?" The construction is always the same. observation, effect, specific request. No blame assigned to character, no ancient history weaponized, no ledger of accumulated sacrifices presented for inspection. Just the present moment, named plainly, with a clear and reasonable ask attached. What makes it work, and Amara was precise about this, is the absence of emergency. When you speak to your adult child from a place of urgency or grief or long compressed need, they feel the pressure, and the instinct is to push back, to protect their own equilibrium. But when you speak from stillness, from genuine, inhabited calm, they have nothing to brace against. The words land in open space. There is room for them to actually be heard. Amara told me something else I have thought about often since. She said, "You are not trying to make your son feel guilty. You are trying to make your son feel accurate. Guilt is about the past. Accuracy is about right now." That distinction rewired something in me. I had spent years alternating between swallowing my hurt and then, occasionally, erupting with the full accumulated weight of it, which only ever produced guilt, defensiveness, and retreat. Accuracy was something different. Accuracy was simply, this is what is happening, and this is what I need to happen instead. 4 months after that first conversation, the flights conversation, the one where I first used the phrase, Raphael called one Sunday with none of his usual agenda. He called because he said he had been thinking about something and wanted to ask me about it. He had been thinking about his grandfather, my father-in-law Wendell, and how Wendell had died without Raphael ever having asked him the questions he now carried around like unresolved debt. He wanted to ask me his questions while he still could, while I was still here to answer them. We spoke for 2 hours. At the end, he said, "Mom, I don't know what's changed between us lately, but I like it. You feel more present, I guess, more like yourself." I told him nothing had changed, except that I had stopped being so willing to disappear. "I didn't know you were disappearing," he said. "I know," I said. "That's the thing about a slow disappearance. Nobody notices it's happening, not even the person doing it. What I want to say to you, whoever you are, wherever you are sitting right now with the weight of this particular loneliness, is that the words themselves are not magic. The words work because they emerge from a new place inside you, a place that has stopped negotiating with its own worth. The sentence is simple. When you speak to me that way, it doesn't feel respectful. I'd like you to try that again. But the sentence only carries its full power when you believe, in the moment of speaking it, that you are not asking for a favor. You are simply describing a standard that exists and will continue to exist regardless of how it is received. Stop. Name. Request. Every time. Without heat, without history, without the accumulated ledger of years. Your adult child loves you, almost certainly, in the complicated and imperfect way that people love the things they have always had and therefore take for granted. What they may not yet know, what nobody told them because you never required them to learn it, is that your presence has weight. Your thoughts have substance. Your time has value. Your perspective is not charming background noise. It is the considered view of someone who has lived longer, survived more, and paid attention throughout. You do not need to convince them of this through argument. You only need to stop behaving as though you are not sure of it yourself. The photograph sits on my desk. Raphael at 7, arms wide, face tilted to the sun. He called last Sunday for 43 minutes. We talked about his children, about a book I had been reading, about a decision he was wrestling with at work, about a memory I had of his father, which he asked me to describe in detail and then sat with quietly, like someone handling something they did not want to drop. Before he hung up, he said, "Same time next week?" I said yes.